On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Patrick Leung. He is the CTO of Faro Health. We're going to be talking about transformation into an AI first company. And what I mean by that is obviously Patrick's been brought on and Faro Health has been making a shift into an AI first company. He's going to walk us through what that means for his engineering org, what it means for defining the AI strategy, and what happens to the skills, because I think there's a lot of questions out there and culture and all those type of things. So Patrick, excited to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Amir. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, can you tell everyone what Faro Health does?
Sure. Faro Health developed a SaaS platform for helping pharmaceutical companies to develop better clinical trials. So we're helping to reduce the burden on patients, reduce the cost, and reduce the time to market of clinical trials, which can take up to 12 years and $2 billion in cost overall to bring to market, which is pretty staggering. So we're trying to make a big dent in that.
Absolutely. Oh, that sounds like a phenomenal mission, and that's a good conversation for a different day. This episode, we're going to be talking about the transition into an AI first company. And I guess I like this topic because I think a lot of companies are trying to incorporate AI, and AI first means something different than just leveraging AI. So maybe let's actually define AI first from your point of view, make sure everyone understands the context.
Sure. It's kind of easy to forget this now because of all the hype around LLMs, large language models, such as GPT and Llama and so on. But even long before these models came along, data science was becoming a really hot thing, like just predicting things using all sorts of different machine learning techniques, increasingly deep learning. And so in the years before joining Faro, I'd done this at Google and Two Sigma Investments, which is a big hedge fund in New York, just applying these different machine learning techniques to various different domains. And even then, there was a lot of hype around data science. Like this was the hottest new job position in the tech marketplace. And when LLMs came along, that all sort of blew up. Like now everyone thinks AI equals large language models. Like that's just how prevalent these models have become. And people are racing to bring these models to apply to solve problems in many, many different domains, including the life sciences where Faro exists. And so I think that it's easy to forget that because there's a lot of people out there rushing out and learning the OpenAI API or pick your favorite large language models API and kind of quickly trying to become AI engineers. But there's also just a whole discipline behind this that I think sometimes gets lost, where some people have spent their entire lives in this realm of machine learning, AI, data science, deep learning, and so on. So when I set out to really kind of reorient Faro around AI and figuring out how to actually use large language models to solve the very real problems that Faro's really trying to solve, I was really looking for people who have deep experience in this. And, I myself have some based on my experiences at Google and Two Sigma and elsewhere, but large language models are pretty new. And so finding people who have real world experience with these models, applying them to and launching them in real products that are used by people is kind of rare still. Increasingly, there are more and more people obviously out there who have this experience, but it took us a while to find people who could do this.
I guess let's maybe taking a step back, because I think you mentioned something interesting about a lot of people are trying to embrace being AI first. And I think a lot of times we're seeing different types and different levels of engagement with AI. When we're talking about being AI first and having AI incorporated deep within the product, I guess in the space of healthcare, Faro Health, how does defining the AI strategy look? Where does that start, and what does that look like in general?
I think in that sense, it's not too different from classical product management, where you examine the customer experience, you examine the existing way things are done, and you identify the pain points. And fortunately, in our case, the pain points are pretty well understood. If you just look at the numbers and look at just how many clinical trials fail or get delayed, each day of delay for a large pharma company actually is millions of dollars in terms of lost revenue or delayed revenue. So the stakes are really high. There were very, very clear problem domains that jumped out at me when I first started looking at this. So one is definitely clinical writing. We're still in a world where people submit Word documents to the FDA. And in fact, I was really surprised to learn that a lot of clinical trials, maybe almost all clinical trials are actually designed and mastered in Microsoft Word. And Microsoft Word is a very capable tool for writing documents, but I wouldn't think of it as being kind of a structured repository for extremely complex plans. Essentially, this is what a clinical trial is, right? It's a multi-year plan involving hundreds of people and very, very complex procedures in multiple sites, potentially all around the world. Why would you sort of model that in a Word document? And so this is the fundamental challenge that Faro set out to solve when it was first founded. And so I just looked at what are the pain points here as far as designing a clinical trial and then submitting it to the FDA in order to essentially put a dent in that really, really long life cycle and expensive life cycle of running a clinical trial. And so on the face of it, yes, large language models, they're so good at writing. Let's just get them to write a clinical protocol. This is the sort of master document of a clinical trial that gets submitted to the FDA. Very, very complex document, essentially hundreds and hundreds of pages of really highly technical text. And so with tables and diagrams and other things too. And so that's what we set out to do. That was the first pillar of our AI strategy, is taking all the really structured, well-organized model data in the Faro Study Designer platform, and then basically using that to power an LLM-based model to generate a clinical protocol document. And that ended up being way harder than I thought. I walked in there sort of naively thinking, oh, this is a prompt engineering problem. We have all the data ready. We can just organize it into a lovely prompt that simulates a clinical writer and basically spits out FDA level, FDA clinical grade documentation. And no, you can't do that. These large language models are very general purpose. And building a sort of a custom model, we looked at that, like fine-tuning an LLM to essentially be oriented and retrain it on clinical documentation. Didn't seem to work that well, was extremely expensive and time-consuming. And so we set about creating an architecture, a multi-model architecture that is able to produce clinical grade documentation by encoding a lot of the clinical expertise on our clinical scientist team into the model and into the prompts that we use to actually evaluate the output. We have one model that generates candidate documentation section by section for the protocol document. And we have a second model that evaluates the output and has all these rules and tests that are essentially collated from the feedback of our clinical science team. And together, those models are able to produce iteratively documentation of sufficient quality.
Interesting. I mean, obviously, it sounds like what we're talking about when we're mentioning becoming AI first and embedding the AI deep within the processes. Just a question on change management, because I think as you're kind of talking about the technology solution, is there a point at which you kind of look at the change management piece and kind of look at the impact it's going to have on the human doing the work, or is this first and foremost technology driven, and then you kind of start looking at the change process?
Change management is absolutely critical. When you're talking about really kind of revolutionizing a process that companies have been doing in some cases for many decades, that impacts the jobs, that impacts the activities, the day-to-day, the way that people do their jobs in many different roles at the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company. And so we have an entire team dedicated to working hand in hand with our customers to really help them through the change management process. And we find that some sponsors are super gung-ho on AI, super gung-ho on change, on essentially anything that will help them create trials that are leaner and better for patients and more able to enroll and all these kind of good things. They'll just jump on it. And others are really quite conservative and they have this existing way of doing things. And it's really a process to kind of walk them through using a tool that's really different from what they're used to and just seeing the value. So because of that, we've really designed the tool to deliver value as quickly as possible. So you start modeling a tool, you start modeling a clinical trial in our tool, and very quickly you can gain insights regarding the patient burden, the complexity, the potential outcome of the trial, and so on, so that we deliver value as quickly as possible and win over those people who maybe are a little bit skeptical about whether this is all worth it.
Okay, so I love the fact that the change management aspect is being incorporated, and I know this episode's supposed to be about the impact of the engineering team. So I probably could keep asking you questions about just the strategy and the business, but I'd like to pivot to the engineering component. I guess you mentioned, engineers, a lot of engineers have at least tested, toyed with, grabbed with something from one of these LLMs to see what's happening. But I guess as a CTO, if you've shifted the company has shifted into AI first, your job is to support those initiatives with the right engineers. Is there an impact, or what is the impact to the engineering team itself when you're heading down this AI first strategy?
Well, I would say the big impact is that the product roadmap starts shifting toward AI-enabled features. So this document generation initiative is now Faro's second product, essentially. And so we're building a team around that. And pretty much these days, anything involving AI involves Python, which is a different language. If typically full stack developers don't develop in Python, they develop in React, JavaScript, Node, this kind of thing. And so for many engineers in the organization, it's kind of a new opportunity to learn another language and to start to learn a whole new field, a whole new type of programming related to essentially machine learning and specifically these large language models. So the roadmap starts shifting. People start oriented toward building features that are AI enabled. There is a separate team that we have that basically consists of data scientists. Some of them more on the modeling side, others more on the data engineering side, analytics, this kind of thing. And so those two teams have to interact. There's dependencies that arise, and they are quite different. I think a lot of people underestimate the difference between data science and traditional software engineering, product engineering. Product engineering tends to be very oriented around kind of getting it right, like quality. And of course, agile is a way of being adaptable and staying sort of in tune with the customer's needs and kind of failing fast and all that kind of good stuff. But data science is way more sciencey. It's kind of like almost like research where you have some thesis around could we use some kind of machine learning classifier to predict certain things, like maybe the number of amendments in a trial or something like that. And maybe we can and maybe we can't. And so there's a lot more exploration. There's a lot more sort of, I guess, just figuring out if things are possible and being okay with failing. And I think the other thing people tend to underestimate about data science and AI is just how important data engineering is, or feature engineering is sometimes called. And that's in some ways the sort of less, for lack of a better word, sort of sexy side of programming AI, of AI engineering, where you're basically preparing the data, which is the input to the super cool model. But actually, most of your work ends up going there, especially if you're not in the business of creating your own LLM, which most people are not, right? Like in the old days before LLMs, the old days, meaning like 3 years ago or so, people, the sort of the sexy work in data science was creating these models, like using deep learning or other kind of cool predictive models. But now we don't really do that anymore, right? At best, we're fine tuning. And even that, as I said before, it's sort of expensive and sometimes dubious. And so we're using these LLMs as kind of like black boxes in many cases. Luckily, we have a large array of different LLMs to kind of evaluate and check out, and we have lots of optionality, but we're not building those. They're at the end of the process. And so a lot of the work is in terms of really crafting a rich data set for the to serve as input to the LLMs.
I guess when you're, and I appreciate kind of breaking out how what the teams look like. When you are looking at being AI first, you mentioned Python. You need some different types of skills in your team. If you are a company, maybe this is Faro Health shift to an AI product versus where you're at now. For the skills that were on the team and where the skills are now, that transformation, is that a case of helping upskill current employees, current engineers? Is it a case of, hey, they still have work because there is work for them, we need to bring in net new skills from the outside? How do you adjust and handle the need for potentially some different skills on the team?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's definitely elements of both, in the sense that if you're a feature engineer, if you're a React engineer who's building features in a SaaS platform, and all of a sudden your roadmap is full of AI features, they need to have a UX that's integrated with your tool. And so that's what's happening right now, is we have all these new things on our roadmap related to incorporating AI-driven insights and other forms of analytics as well as the document generation. And that's all going to be sort of integrated in our mainstream product. At the same time, as I said before, you need a separate team of data scientists. And it might be possible, certainly, for some engineers to make the switch and become like a data engineer. And maybe some of them might even have enough machine learning experience from previous jobs or their education or whatever to make the switch and become kind of like a full-fledged AI engineer, like kind of modeler. But that's kind of rarer. And I would say the first thing I did was start looking for a lead. I was the interim lead when I came on board, but I found someone better than me to do this full time. And we work really well together. And I think, what we're doing is building a team around that expert. And I think that really, if you want to be a serious AI company, you need to do that. You need to find someone amazing who has real experience launching products that have AI-based models in them. And those people with domain expertise, with a cultural fit and so on, it takes time. It takes real time and care to find someone who's right for that position. And then you got to close them because they're in demand these days. So you better have an inspiring roadmap. You better have a really high potential business to attract the best of the best to lead your AI team.
Absolutely. I guess, on touching that, on closing that type of candidate, that is I'm in a recruiting company. That is the role that everyone wants. And obviously the competition is fierce. When you look at that aspect of it, obviously there's larger companies, RSUs, you have private companies with potential equity on the table as well. Have you seen a strategy or have you seen things that help when you're competing against those bigger tech players in terms of bringing in this particular talent?
Absolutely. I mean, even before AI came along, there's always that conundrum of how do you attract top talent when there's all these super high paying, super exciting large companies out there like Google and Meta and so on that people might want to work at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, first of all, as you probably well know as a recruiter, Amir, different people have very different what I call utility functions, as far as what they want out of their work. And some people really, really prize stability and high cash comp and, having a whole host of really amazing people to work with. Some people really value the excitement of a startup, the impact that you personally will have, the upward mobility potentially of being in a fast growing company, and just having the experience of working in an early stage startup and really being part of the team that makes the company happen and makes new things happen in the world. I personally, despite having worked a long time at Google and other big companies, I really orient towards the latter, towards really taking a bit of a risk and getting involved in something that I feel has a really, really strong mission that will benefit humanity and benefit the planet, and essentially working with really great people who share that sense of excitement about the mission. So I think you just got to find those people and be able to speak their language and convince them that the business is viable and the people they're working with are great and they're going to be working on interesting things. And then you have more than a fair shot at convincing them that this is a better thing for them than maybe working at a tech giant.
Absolutely. From going back to the engineering side, and obviously you need to bring in these strong leads. When you're looking at engineers like to learn, they want to move to the latest and greatest. When you are bringing in this lead, one did come in and take over for you. Obviously, within the team, there's going to be dynamics. There's going to be some cultural shifts. People are going to be working on some of these more advanced solutions. A lot of people probably do want to work on this advanced solution. They want to add these skills to their toolbox. How do you handle that cultural component where, not everyone's going to be able to do this, but you might have people that are going to look outside of the company to find similar opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, being part of a team that is developing cutting edge AI features, some people are going to want to do that themselves, and others are going to want to enable it however they can using their unique gifts. And so if you're a front end engineer, for instance, or a UX designer or a product manager, you're still involved in bringing these features to market. You may not be the one doing the actual AI engineering. Now, for people who really want to learn Python, roll up their sleeves and get involved, and we have a few engineers like that, then there's opportunities to do that. And we just have to see, like, how good a fit is this? Like we would with any role. And does it make sense to basically retool and essentially give this person the opportunity to work on AI-based features, or does it make more sense to hire outside the company and shore up our Python expertise and then maybe later on offer that opportunity to people? It all depends on the nuances of just what the available staffing is, what the needs are, and so on. But I will say that at a startup, there's more of, hey, people would just do whatever it takes for the company to be successful and for us to launch a great product, rather than I insist on working on X, Y, and Z, which is what big companies are more about, right? Where you have like a zillion teams and they all do different things, and you can say, oh, now I feel like working on infrastructure, and now I want to focus on front end for my sakes, because for a company like Google, or pick your favorite tech giant, they don't need you to do a certain thing necessarily. It's more just like what will serve your career development and your desires best. Whereas in a startup, there's that whole existential, like, we got to get this product launched. We got to make this company successful, and everyone just do whatever it takes to make that done, to get that done. And I really love that.
Awesome. I guess maybe a final question when it comes to engineers. The engineers that are currently on the team, you mentioned some upskilling. What does that look like when you're moving towards this AI first? Like, obviously, you mentioned Python. Obviously, we know there's APIs around some of these LLMs. What does training? What is the training? Where are they getting trained? What does that training look like?
I think there's a lot of training out there, high quality training on places like Coursera and so on, where you can learn all about this stuff, and even get some degree of practical experience because they've worked examples and so on. But nothing beats just kind of talking to an expert, diving into what they're doing, helping out in some way. That's just the best way, I think, for an engineer to learn something and quickly become versant, to be actually involved in some way in launching that feature. So I think if you're fortunate enough to have people who have really done this, who have launched actual LLM powered features, then that's gold. That's just like picking their brains, helping them out however you can. Like, that's really the fastest way, because you can learn from their experience. You can avoid making whatever mistakes they made and so on. And short of that, I would say there's tons of courses out there you can take and so on to get you credentials and so on. And some of the more immersive courses actually really are designed to give you that experience and so on. And so I think there's one, I can't remember, like a friend of mine took one, I think it was Flatiron something. But anyway, I guess I can get you the name later. But there are definitely immersive multi-month courses that will give you some of that, and they're designed to really launch you into this career of being a data scientist. And I think for people who really like, that's their heart's desire, it might be, and if your current company doesn't offer you that opportunity to work with experts and to potentially learn this on the job, then I'd highly recommend looking into some of those more immersive data science courses that are really designed to help you make that career transition.
Absolutely. I like that. I guess, it's been a year that you've been at Faro Health. This transition to delivering AI first products. Are there any things that now that you're ahead of where you were last year, are there any things when you look back that you've learned that if somebody else is transitioning some products to being AI first that you'd want to share?
I think for quite some amount of time, I was on my own doing this, either as an independent AI engineer consultant, which I was before I kind of came on board full time as CTO, or just in my role as CTO. And I think if you are in a leadership role like I was, getting cracking on hiring full time people earlier, that would be my biggest thing I would change if I went back a year, would just be right away saying, we got to hire a team. Rather than, oh, I've got to figure out the strategy first. I'm sort of building things myself, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that building the team, getting that talent on board, definitely. And I think that there was a lot of learning, and I don't know if there was any way of avoiding that learning, but just kind of going into this new domain, figuring out what needed to be done, and then getting going on the document generation and so on. Maybe I think I would have moved earlier on the data engineering, on really building a high quality repository of structured trial information. That's proven to be a critical asset for us, critical for so many things we want to do. And I think that I myself, I think, underestimated the importance of investing in an AI-driven pipeline to extract structured information from all the different trials that are out there and build a really high-quality database to be able to do analytics and prediction and lots of really cool things that we're doing now with the data set that we've built. So, better late than never. But I think moving earlier on those two things would have helped a lot.
Very good. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. I know a lot of people actually had a CTO reach out to ask me what other engineering leaders are doing as they transition, and where does the training come from? Who do you hire first? So I think this episode's great. Highlighted a lot of those questions. Patrick, if somebody wants to reach out to you and kind of dive into what the engineering org needs as they're transitioning to some AI first products, what's a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably LinkedIn. You can just, I think the link is going to be on the page for this podcast, but you can easily also just search for me on LinkedIn, Patrick, Faro Health, you'll find me. So I look forward to connecting.
Okay, awesome, man. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. This has been great.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I do think this is a great topic because I think a lot of people that are moving towards AI products, being AI first companies, I think there's some dynamic shifts that are happening, especially when it comes to some of the skills. Patrick touched on some of the strategy and how that translates and how he's working with his team to upskill, and he hired someone to replace himself to actually provide more bandwidth. So I think this is a great episode. Please share this with somebody else who might benefit from hearing from the content Patrick just gave us. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.